morning. My name's Gavin, and this is the Daily Reflection Podcast.
Welcome to the Daily Reflection Podcast. My name is Michael Lynn from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And I'm Lee McGinnis from Leesburg, Virginia.
As members of the recovery community, we created this podcast as a way to provide experience, strength, and hope through the lens of the Daily Reflection book. Each day, we interview members of the recovery community in the hope that their experience may provide inspiration.
We value inclusion and diversity, and we really want to provide a platform for all the voices of recovery. We aren't affiliated with any 12-step or recovery program, but you may hear these mentioned throughout the course of an interview.
Hey, before we get to the show, I'd like to ask a favor. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, it'd be great if you could leave us a comment or a rating. This is going to do a couple of things. It's going to help us expand our reach and improve the show.
We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Special thanks to Jeff Boehm of Frederick, Maryland, helping us edit these episodes and helping us get them out the door. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It is April 22nd, and what do we have in store for us this morning?
We've got Gavin Y in the studio, and he's from Lafayette Hill, Pennsylvania, and he's going to share on New Soil, New Roots for April 22nd. Gavin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is a great opportunity. I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, let folks know who you are, what your sobriety date is, and any other pertinent details.
Sure. My name's Gavin Y. Live in Lafayette Hill, Pennsylvania. I got sober in the Fairmount section of Philadelphia back in 2008. I've been sober for 13 years.
Fantastic. Well, Gavin, we start the show in the same way every day. We ask the guests to read the daily reflection for today. Do you have that handy? Would you get us started?
Sure do. So today's daily reflection is titled New Soil, New Roots. Moments of perception can build into a lifetime of spiritual serenity. As I have excellent reason to know, roots of reality, supplanting the neurotic underbrush, will hold fast despite the high winds of the forces which would destroy us, or which we would use to destroy ourselves. Coming from As Bill Sees It, page 173. I came to AA green, a seedling quivering with exposed taproots. It was for survival, but it was a beginning. I stretched, developed, twisted, but with the help of others, my spirit eventually burst up from the roots. I was free. I acted, withered, went inside, prayed, acted again, understood anew. As one moment of perception struck, up from my roots, spirit arms lengthened into strong green hoots, high springing servants stepping skyward. Here on earth, God unconditionally continues the legacy of higher love. My AA life put me on a different footing. My roots grasped a new soil. From Alcoholics Anonymous, page 12.
Wow, that's a beautiful piece of writing for sure. What comes to mind for you as you read it?
So the first time I read it, I actually had no idea what I was talking about. And I felt like I was kind of what we were talking about before the podcast started. It felt like I was in senior year English class again, and I wasn't exactly sure. Like, kind of reminded me of reading William Butler Yeats a little bit, where you kind of have a concept of a little bit of what's going on, but don't really know what everybody's getting at. And then I put it aside for a few hours, and then I came back and I reread it again. And the only thing that really stands out to me is how it makes me feel when I think about the imagery that's discussed. I'm sure we're going to end up getting into my recovery story a little bit, but I could remember the first time I ever told my story was at a 12-step meeting at the Night Owl 13 years ago. And I remember that story being very rooted in a lot of life experience up until that point, and a lot of what my drinking life looked like, what my young adult life looked like. And then fast forward 13 years, the last time I told my story, the drinking part of it and the life before coming into recovery was only but kind of a small part of it. I spent most of the time talking about the 13 years since I put down the drink. And when I read that daily reflection, they talk about new roots and a new soil and experience kind of informing the way that you look at things from here on out. You know, the most important part of my recovery, other than the obvious part, is life experiences that has happened since then and how that's continued to inform who I am now. If you think of drinking as a way of kind of stunting personal growth, you're robbing yourself of all these life experiences that come your way. All of a sudden the drink is gone and you're kind of this raw nerve. This guy I used to go to meetings with used to use the term, you feel like a raw nerve very early on, and you get exposed to all these feelings and all these sentiments, but you also kind of take hold in these moments a little bit along the way. And that ends up kind of exposing you to the person that you end up becoming, or the most authentic version of yourself. It sounded way more cogent in my head before I started talking, but I hope I did a pretty good job of explaining that.
No, that was beautiful. And it matches perfectly the daily reflection. I mean, new roots. I mean, think about it, what you said about being a raw nerve and growing in that way. Yeah, it's powerful imagery for sure. Tell me a little bit about what was happening in your life when you first got sober. I mean, how old were you?
I was 25 years old, and I was very much not ready to quit drinking. I thought I was way too young. I had been drinking on and off since I was about 13 years old. My drinking kind of ramped up a little bit more as my teenage years went on. And then when I got to college, I found myself in an environment where binge drinking and everyday drinking was pretty much well accepted and you could get away with it. And I got arrested maybe 3 or 4 times, and I ended up having to go to drug and alcohol counseling when I was about 19 years old. I think I was a sophomore in college. The university I was attending made me talk to a drug and alcohol counselor. And I remember it was at that point that they kind of planted the seed when I told them how often I drank and why I drank and what the behavior was like when I drank. They kind of broached the subject of this being problematic behavior for me. And I remember 20 years old thinking, I'm too young for this. I'm in college. Every college student acts this way. I don't know what they're talking about. And I walked out of there and didn't really think too much of it. But about a year later, I turned 21, and it was right around the time I turned 21 that I started to have noticeable health side effects from my drinking. I noticed that my hands and knees would shake uncontrollably anytime that I was sober or anytime I was kind of in between binges. And I can remember sitting at my desk in classrooms and my knees would knock back and forth together. I was probably about 30 pounds lighter than I am now. I couldn't really keep down food. I looked kind of a little bit like a skeleton walking around in a sweatshirt. I had a lot of issues, digestive issues, as a result of my drinking as well, too. I started to look at drinking less as a social activity and more as something that I used to self-medicate. And that was, it was pretty astounding looking back now to have that kind of realization at the age of 21 where, hey, this isn't like happy-go-lucky fun time anymore. This is what I kind of need to get by. After graduation, all my classmates, they moved across the country, they pursued careers, their life was unfolding for them. And I crawled into a bottle for the next 6 months, drank all my money away, and then tried to get a job. I lasted about 6 months, 6 to 9 months in that job. Was still drinking every day. I couldn't stay awake during the day and I couldn't fall asleep at night. Drunk driving had become a huge part of my story. Blackouts became a huge part of my story. I lost that first job, and it was at that point that I realized I was maybe 23. I knew I had to get a handle on my drinking, and I knew I had to act like an adult and try and manage this situation. So I tried to section my drinking down to just weekends and happy hours, and I would try not to drink during the week. I tell this story to a lot of friends that know me in recovery that the last year of my drinking, the frequency with which I was drinking had gone down, but the behavior that would happen during these binges became more and more outlandish. Still drunk driving all the time. I would wake up outside a lot. I would sit down at a bar sometimes and have 20 beers and not feel a thing. And then the next day I could have 1 beer and then not be able to stand up. I still couldn't keep down any food. I kind of looked like, I don't know what exactly I looked like, but I was not exactly the picture of health. And I didn't have any way to stop what I was doing. And I remember, I guess it was right around Lent. And anybody that's familiar with the Christian religion or Christian practices, they know Lent's a time of year that people will give up something for 40 days. I was like, oh, this is perfect. I will quit drinking for 40 days. I will see how that goes. And I made it 2 days. And I was living in Fairmount. I walked past the bar in Fairmount that had really great cheeseburgers. I was going to walk in, get dinner, and then go home. And I walked into that bar and I came out of a blackout the next day. And I remember thinking this is the first time I ever made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to do something, and I still had no power and I did it anyway. And the worst part about it is that I was so distraught and felt so awful, and I had no way of getting this bad feeling off of me. So the only thing I could think to do was to start drinking again more to get rid of it. And it was after that I woke up the next day, which was February 10th, 2008, and that was my last drink. I had a lot of family members that were part of the 12-step community, and I had other family members who had kind of suggested to me over the years that the way I drank was similar to other people in my family, the way they drank, and that they had sought help through 12-step. And this is maybe something I want to look into a little bit more, take a harder look at. So I found meetings in my area. There was a Tuesday night men's group down on Fairmount Avenue. And I went to do kind of like the reconnaissance view of it. I walked along the other side of the street. I saw the single door with the light bulb hanging over it and people standing outside smoking. And I walked up and somebody asked if it was my first meeting. I said yes, and walked in, and everybody in that meeting, when they found out it was my first meeting, they went around the room and they talked about their life experiences and what they went through. And every person that put their hand up, I kept looking for reasons why I did not identify with that person, because I didn't look like them. I didn't come from where they came from. I didn't do the things that they did. But every person that talked that night, I remember I could identify with how they felt. I didn't put my hand in the air and say I was an alcoholic, but I told them that life for the past 4 or 5 years kind of become this wheel where I would drink and I'd get crushed by this wheel. And then I'd have to pull myself out from underneath of it and pull my way back up to the top of that wheel. And then once I got to the top, I would drink again, and then I'd get crushed by it. And that was life up until that point.
Wow, it's a moving story, and I'm glad you made it in. I'm reading the reflection, and it says, essentially, you come in green, a seedling quivering with exposed taproots. And then it says, I acted, withered, went inside, prayed, acted again, understood anew as one moment of perception struck. And then eventually I started growing in my spirit arms, lengthened into strong green shoots. And I'm wondering, what was that like for you? The process of learning who you were and what spirituality meant to you and all that through the steps. How did that sort of unfold?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? Because when you're new, the first thing that you hear from everybody else in the rooms is how much better life gets by getting sober. And that's the one thing that always kind of resonated with me, is that, oh, okay, life's going to get better. Life's going to get better. But people don't tell you that that's not a linear path. It's not a straight up trajectory. It's not like day one comes in and then all of a sudden everything just gets better and better and better each day. Great things happen along the way, and those gifts kind of come, but it kind of looks like a big up and down line graph if you had to try and imagine what life looks like, because life's not getting any easier for any of us, whether we're drinking or we're not. We're just getting more adept at handling it. And those situations that really suck when you're sober are just kind of opportunities for growth or opportunities to gain experience. Like, that's what I think of when I think of roots, right? Because it's not exactly the prettiest part of the plant, but it's the thing that really you lean on in very heavy storms. So yeah, my 13 years was kind of all over the place. I think the first year in recovery, I tried to be as good as possible with doing step work, following sponsorship, trying to sponsor other people once I'd gotten through my step work. And I was making meetings every day, twice a day during the week. I'd hit Sunrise Semester in the morning before work, and then I'd go to the Fairmount Clubhouse at night. And that was a safe space for me. And it was a safe space even when, nothing had really changed in my life. I was still at the same job, still living in the same house. And then I was really happy. I think the first year of my sobriety was one of the happiest years of my sobriety, because the expectations were so low. All I had to do was keep my job, pay my rent, and go to meetings. And that was it. If that was all that happened in the first year, things were great. And then the second year happened, and nothing happened during the second year. And I was super resentful, because I was like, when do I get all these cash and prizes that everybody's talking about? On paper, everything looked exactly the same. And I was complaining about nothing changing. When is stuff going to start happening for me? And then in the third year, I got everything that I wanted all at once. It was right around the time of the financial collapse. People were getting fired left and right. I was someone who has always been kind of tenuous in my employment. So I thought that I was pretty much expendable when the financial collapse happened. And it turned out I was offered a promotion and moved across the country to Chicago. I was about 3 years sober, living in a city where I don't know anybody. And all of a sudden, this thought creeps into my mind of, I could really get away with things out here. I don't go to the same meetings. I don't know the same network. I could really start over in a lot of different ways. And it was at that point I kind of strayed away from my recovery network. I didn't have anybody that I talked to out there, nobody that really knew my background. And it was really kind of a lonely and isolating time. I didn't really have anything else but work to throw myself into. So I became a workaholic. That was the addiction du jour for like 3 years, where I was married to my cell phone, my work email. I couldn't sleep anymore. I would get up and check text messages and emails in the middle of the night. I didn't have any kind of healthy balance. I was just kind of latching onto this thing for fulfillment. And I only bring that up because I feel like people can find other unhealthy things to latch onto when they're first coming into recovery. Like when we talk about being green and learning through experience, that experience of finding validation in some other kind of external factor informs the way I go about things today. I try to place less emphasis on things that aren't fulfilling or something outside of myself and my family. But I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent a little bit here.
No,
but
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm interested in how you made that transition, though. So when did you discover that, the things externally were, while they were probably satisfying and checking some boxes in your life, they weren't truly fulfilling? How did you make that transition? What did that look like?
So I started having panic attacks. I was on vacation with my brother. We were in another part of the world, and we got on a bus one day, and all of a sudden I got this intense feeling like I was going to throw up, and I couldn't breathe, and it felt kind of like I don't know, like the walls are kind of closing in, or like my peripheral vision like couldn't expand too far outside of my own face. And I thought it was because I ate something weird at breakfast, or I thought I was just getting car sick. But then it started happening every single time I was in some kind of vehicle or public transportation or room where the doors and windows were closed. I started having panic attacks 2 or 3 times a day. A lot of times around public transportation and a lot of times around work situations. I worked in the trading industry, so anytime the market would open or the market close, I would have them. If you live in Chicago and you can't take public transportation, you're kind of screwed because that's like the only way to get around in that city. So I started to seek a therapist. I got some prescription to help out with what was going on, a non-narcotic prescription. I tried doing everything possible to try and figure out what was going on. I remember thinking like if I didn't end up getting this fixed, this was going to end up killing me. And I was 6 years sober. This isn't supposed to happen to you when you're 6 years sober. But I was walking down the street one morning and there was a rabbit on the sidewalk. And I remember walking towards this rabbit and I knew the rabbit saw me. And the second I got too close to it, it was going to run away. And we're on the sidewalk. There's oncoming traffic out in the middle of the street. And as I walk towards it, the thing runs into the road and gets run over. It was awful. And I remember thinking, like, I just fell to pieces after it happened. Like I just caused this to happen. And it was a gross misrepresentation of a person's ability to influence outside situations. But I felt all this guilt about every bad thing that was happening around me all the time. And I attached it to my work. I needed to get out. So I started looking around for a change. It sounds bad to say, but I stopped caring so much about my work, or I tried to right size the influence that it had on my life. And I tried to pursue other things outside of my 9-to-5 job that were more fulfilling, more so than a paycheck or a title or anything like that. And it was kind of a tough thing to swallow because I think people that come into recovery often think of their time as insulating them from problems. Like I've got X amount of years, or I've got, go to X amount of meetings or whatever, but it's not necessarily the case. It's really what other things are you doing to invest in the quality of your life outside of just like stacking time on top of itself.
Now, I know you experienced a career transition around that time, and even more recently. Are you comfortable in talking about, how your career has changed and how that feeds into your recovery?
Sure. Yeah. So I did stay in finance for another 4 or 5 years. I left Chicago and moved back to Philadelphia right around 2014, I want to say. I got involved coaching at a local CrossFit gym in Fairmount right around the same time. And I wasn't doing it for money. I did it just as a volunteer because I liked the way I felt about myself when I was doing it. And I liked the feeling I got with helping other people. And it helped deal with this anxiety better than any medication I'd ever gotten. I'd take myself off the medication around the same time as well too, just because I didn't like the way that it made me feel, and I felt way more fulfilled doing this than anything else that I could have taken at that time. Around that time, I found out about this nonprofit called Phoenix. The Phoenix is a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded in 2006 by this individual named Scott Strode. He's a man in long-term recovery himself. I think he's been sober now for maybe 23, 24 years. And he got sober and found himself out in Colorado, got into ice climbing, boxing, and rock climbing. And one specific time he was ice climbing, he got to the top of the summit and felt this huge sensation of empowerment. And he tells this story way better than I do. But completing the summit of this mountain, he looked around and for the first time in a long time felt a certain amount of peace. He knew then that that was something that could benefit other individuals in recovery. So he came up with this concept, which eventually started as a gym for sober people that would be kind of like a boxing, rock climbing gym, and anybody could attend as long as they were 48 hours sober. The concept started in Denver and Boulder, and then from there it spread out to Boston and California. And then over the years, satellite chapters started popping up all across the country. And eventually, one such chapter about 4 years ago popped up in Philadelphia. So at that point, I'd been coaching for about 2 years, and I knew they were looking for CrossFit coaches in the area. I always knew that what I was doing was helping out my sobriety, and I wanted to check out to see what it would look like coaching other individuals that were either new in recovery or had been in recovery for a really long time and needed kind of something else to help empower them or make them feel good about themselves. So I started again just as a volunteer, and I loved it. I loved the feeling of being involved in other people's recovery, and I loved the feeling it gave me to be in kind of a unique position of service. The years would go by, and as I volunteered there more and more, a conversation kind of started between Scott and myself where we talked about what it would look like if I ever came to work for the organization professionally. And then lo and behold, about 6 months ago, they came to me with a proposal for a role. I jumped at it. And it wasn't an easy decision because life had really kind of grown by leaps and bounds at that point. I got married. We had a daughter, 2 dogs. We moved out to the suburbs. It wasn't exactly the most ideal time to be making any kind of wild career changes, but I knew when that opportunity came across that if I didn't try, I'd always wonder. And the idea of having that hanging over my head the rest of my life, I knew I wouldn't be able to deal with. So I had to find out, and I said yes. And now I work for this nonprofit full time, and I have stressful days. I've got happy days, but I couldn't be more at peace with the decision to pursue something that's as richly fulfilling as this has been for me.
Such a beautiful story. I love how, recovery gives you the opportunity to truly live authentically, like to live in alignment with, for your work and your sobriety and your family, everything to be in alignment with your values is, I think, really the definition of joy and happiness. And I love what you're doing because I think it's something we don't talk about as much as we should in recovery, which is our, we talk a lot about our sort of our mental health and our spiritual well-being, but we don't talk as much about our physical health, and everything's connected. Like if our bodies are healthy, there's a good chance our minds will be healthy and we'll want to pursue spiritual health as well. So I think it's really cool. I was telling you earlier, we were talking before the show, and I went to yoga every single day for the first couple of years of sobriety, and I believe it, along with AA, saved my life. I needed I needed to be on the mat, a centering place besides the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to move my body and get stronger and be healthier.
Yeah, I think the more you end up talking to other people in recovery, very rarely is it one thing that ends up becoming part of a person's everyday practice. It's usually a combination of a lot of little things that people do to maintain that kind of spiritual and mental health that they're looking for. Like for me, the 12 steps helped me clean up my life, but then afterwards I needed other things to try and fill up the rest of the time of the day. Helped me find a little bit more of a unique way to be of service. And at the same time, it's kind of selfish, right? Like I'm really doing it just because it benefits me in the long term. Like I'm just doing this because I feel great afterwards. So it's been pretty wild.
I love that. I think we do a great disservice to newcomers. I think, you've heard the old adage, don't worry about what you're eating, take candy with you, and it's okay to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day or whatever when you come in. Don't be too hard on yourself. But I really think we do a great disservice. I personally have experienced a wholesale transformation in my own mental space because of my physical practice. I mean, I work out like a madman, but I only do it because I am so much better mentally. My mental state always follows my physical state. And I'm curious what you might say to the newcomer that's struggling with addiction and some of the things that goes along with that. What do you tell the newcomer?
So what's the old adage that everybody always ends up hearing is that, you want to find someone that has what you want and go pursue that. I try to find 10 people that seem to have a certain calmness about them and ask them, what are they doing besides just going to meetings? Because the meetings were huge for me, but I started asking a lot of other people, like, what does a healthy life look for you? And you're right. When I was brand new, people said, don't quit smoking. If you really get cravings, go down to A+ and pick up a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Like, don't worry about all this other stuff. Just stay sober for now. And to a certain extent, that helped, but it wasn't really a good framework for the rest of my life. Now there's not really kind of like one wholesale thing that I do that's going to fix me every single day. There's a bunch of like really small little things that I do. Exercise is one, sunlight's one, making sure I get enough water, making sure what I eat doesn't make me feel like trash. Now that I'm getting pretty close to 40, stretching in the morning is really important for me, which sounds pretty hokey. And I often thought it's not really going to help me out, but lo and behold, if I do like 5 minutes of it every morning, I actually feel better. Staying off my phone, or if I am on my phone, trying to stay off of social media, because I find social media is like this, it's like kind of like the black hole of serenity. Like if I'm feeling really good and I don't want to, I'll sit on Instagram for 5 minutes. I've never sat on social media and then been like, oh, well, that was really refreshing. TV can kind of be the same thing. Reading more helps. Things like that. Especially when I was at that 4 or 5 year mark and I was having those panic attacks, I didn't really know what the hell was going to solve my problem, but I was ready to try everything. So I tried like 10 different things, and the stuff that seemed to work, I made that part of like a daily routine for me.
This has been a great conversation. Just for the listeners, we'll go ahead and post the link to the Phoenix in our show notes. So I think to reiterate, it's a gym, these are gyms that people can go to with 48 hours or more of sobriety for free, and to do CrossFit and yoga and all kinds of cool things that cost a lot of money, actually. I don't know where you were when I first got sober, but okay, we'll post it in the show notes for the other people. So is there anything else as we wrap up? Anything else that you'd like to share with the audience before we close?
I think for the organization side of things, and this is probably worth mentioning, I'm sorry I left this out until this point, but our bread and butter has always been kind of our in-person programs. And at this point, we're in, I think I mentioned 26 states and 44 cities. But last year, we started thinking, how can we reach more people? And we came up with this concept of virtual programs. And we said, maybe people want to come do yoga on a Zoom session, or they want to do a guided meditation over Zoom. We don't really know, but we'll give this a shot. And sure enough, March of last year, we're coming up on the anniversaries right when COVID broke out, and everything shut down and all of our in-person programming went away. And we said, we came into this being kind of like the pilot year for our virtual program. now let's lean really hard into this. We're at the point now where 50% of the people that we serve are getting to us through our virtual classes that are all available free on our website. We've also kind of accidentally become an international nonprofit because people from Canada are now starting to access our classes as well too. So anybody that's interested in attending, please go to thephoenix.org. You can see what in-person classes are available in your area. And if we don't have in-person classes available in your area, our live streaming classes are, I think there's 8 or 9 a day, and they're available every single day. That's it.
Fantastic.
That's all I've got.
Yeah. Gavin, thank you so much. And we will definitely post links to those resources in the show notes. So if you're listening to this, make sure you check out the show notes. Gavin, thank you once again.
Mike Lee, thank you very much. This was great.
Thanks so much for coming. Wonderful.
Thanks so much for listening. If you want to find us online, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/Daily Reflection Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Daily Reflector. You can read stories of recovery from our community at blog.dailyreflectionpodcast.com. Please don't forget to give us a rating on your podcast app. We greatly appreciate it. Have a great day. This podcast is produced by Lee McGinnis and Michael Lynn, edited by Jeff Bain.